Jesus the Christ. Amen.
Amen.
Today is All Saints Sunday, a day to remember with gratitude those who have gone before us, some of whom we do not know, many of whom we miss and grieve, and all for whom we celebrate with certain hope in the resurrection and in our reunion with them once again. This is also a day to reflect with gratitude on our own baptisms, on our being members of the priesthood of all believers and saints, along with one another, journeying together in a world too often filled with reminders of the need for a word of life. And finally, it is a day to consider the power of the Spirit to call, gather, enlighten, and make holy the church to come in future generations of saints who will one day remember us as they witnessed in their own times of the hope and resurrection and reunion through our Lord Jesus. It is a special day, surely with some sobriety and sadness, intentional ritual and remembrance, but also laced with deep meaning and mystical hope and joy in rising above the present moment for a glimpse into the future where all things will be made new. It is a day to wonder how the Spirit is at this present time, weaving together the saints of yesterday, today, and tomorrow into a great cloud of witnesses surrounding us so that we are not ever alone, but are surrounded and supported by this cloud of witnesses, and that in these lives of faith, truly never apart from this community of believers and never without hope. The gospel reading for today, at least in my opinion, is one of the church's best and most dramatic stories of life and hope and community. And I would like to highlight a couple of details with you before entering into it more personally. First, this 4-day wait is intentional and mentioned for a purpose. But would not 1 day late have done the trick? It seems Jesus knew what he was doing and certainly understood the culture and beliefs around him, such as the common thought that a spirit lingered around the body for 3 days after death, perhaps hoping for an opportunity to return. And after that amount of time had passed, a person was considered irrevocably dead. This will be a full-on miracle, and all around will know it and not be able to explain it away. And I think it helps to wonder and imagine more about just who were these friends of Jesus and how they factor into the story. Mary, Martha, Lazarus, they're named friends by the text, and there are also clues that they may have had some sort of standing in the community, some connections, since they had a family burial vault. Not even Jesus' own family had one for him. Another sign of their relationship with the larger community may be the large number of mourners, a crowd of people, many of them coming from Jerusalem, attending to the sisters and weeping with them at the death of their brother. Quite possibly, Mary, Martha, and Lazarus had been in multiple ways supporters of Jesus' ministry and travels as he went from town to town proclaiming the forgiveness of sins, healing the sick, teaching the way of discipleship, and following the will of God. And there are clues that Mary and Martha and Lazarus were all disciples themselves. He was their teacher and allowed women along with men to sit at his feet, as was the custom. And from an earlier text, we know that Jesus loved them. More personally speaking, when I watch movies or read dramatic stories such as this one, I often find myself wondering who I might be in the story. And maybe you do this in your own way, asking who are you most like, or which character resonates with you best? Who are you in the story? And here, in this text, Jesus raising Lazarus from the dead, I've often thought it was a story about which we were supposed to think of ourselves as Lazarus. And in many ways that makes sense, as Jesus will raise us also. But I confess, I relate more with Mary and Martha. As beloved friends of Jesus, who sent word to him of Lazarus' illness in plenty of time for him to return to Bethany, their response is one I can imagine myself giving. They, in turn, one at a time, meet Jesus on the road and apart from each other, say to him the exact same thing. Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. Can you feel that angst? Sense the pain? This was not an issue of belief. These two believed and funded the ministry so that others could come to believe. They even knew and could express truths about the resurrection and about Jesus being the Messiah. Belief was not their problem. Suffering, in spite of belief, was their problem. And they knew to whom to go. Can you just see Martha in her mourning clothes, looking exhausted from caring for Lazarus for days, and now guests and sick with grief? Upon hearing Jesus was on his way, why waste any more energy? But she heads straight out the door and down the road so fast that apparently no one sees her or follows after her, and she meets him right there on the road. And I imagine her with hands on hips, or arms in the air, not even saying something nice like, "Thank you so much for coming. We hope you had a nice journey. Are you thirsty, maybe?" No, friends, this is a confrontation. And can you see Mary? Dear Mary. Jesus actually sends for her, likely wanting to give her the same space and time as her sister. She is weeping. The mourners are weeping and following after her as she approaches, and she kneels down right on the dirty road at his sandaled, dusty feet. Her face, likely swollen from the extended crying, she chokes out her protest, maybe not even very loud, possibly with breaths in between phrases. Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. And this disciple, dear to the Lord, does not even follow up her words with a statement of faith, like Martha, but with more crying. So yes, these two are the ones with whom I can relate. The angst and the deep grief, the hands on hips, and the falling on the knees. Many of us have been there. Many of us in faith and as believers have had our moments of question, of anger, of despair, all directed at the one we could not help but give it all to. Lord, why did you let this happen? Lord, how could you not do something? Lord, you are too late. My husband Bill and I both lost our fathers some time ago. Bill's father had a long battle with cancer about 2 years after Jonathan and Benjamin were born, and my father in a car accident about 3 years before they were born. And I remember actually wondering during that time if a person could become dehydrated from crying so much and for so long. And I certainly wondered a lot of other things as well. And as I told the Table Talk group a few weeks ago, I stopped going to church completely for a while. Not because I did not believe, but because I did. And I was really angry about what had happened. helped me so much to hear a pastor tell me in our home that God was not angry with me, even though I was so terribly angry with God. And eventually, I could accept that there was much I did not understand. And I came to see God's merciful kindness surrounding me and my family in so many subtle and significant ways. And hear how God, incarnate in Jesus, God with skin on, responds to his friends, to Martha, the hope of the resurrection, no, the promise of the resurrection, and even more, the shared truth that in his very person, he himself is the resurrection and the life. Something about his being there, his coming into the world, will eventually change everything. And to me, Jesus engages her suffering so fully that he becomes deeply moved, greatly distressed, and breaks down into his own weeping, now on the way to the tomb. He doesn't even explain anything. She already knows. She is still suffering her loss. Then Jesus demonstrates what he has been teaching them about himself and about who he is and about their future and about our future. And in that moment, gives them a miracle, something to hold on to in the future, something to share with subsequent generations, something to prove the point of Jesus' compassion and his love and his promise of life fulfilled within himself, and gives them back their brother right then. Lazarus, come out! And then this last tender little detail of instructing them to unbind him, to remove the strips of cloth that must have made him look like a mummy. They would have been afraid of Lazarus. They would have known not to touch a corpse. For to do so would make them ritually unclean and require elaborate purification rituals. You just didn't do that. But Jesus did not expect them to interact with the dead. He asked them to embrace the living Lazarus, now restored to them and to their community and to their touch. Once again, many came to believe on that day, like Mary and Martha had already believed. They could together retell this story for the sake of those who need to know, to hear a word of hope, to glimpse a future where all things will be made new. And I still feel very much, at times, like pre-resurrection Martha and Mary. Maybe like some of you, with hands on hips, weeping, falling to the knees, and even occasionally pointing out where something might stink a little from time to time. We together share the rest of the story, retelling the good news, stating together that we believe in the communion of saints, the forgiveness of sins, the resurrection of the body, and the life everlasting. Together we light candles, remember those whom we love, and we together commit to the future of the church and worship our risen Lord, who will one day raise us also.
Amen.